Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm thrilled to be joined once again by Matthew Cassinelli. This is our 6th year in a row doing our deep dive on shortcuts. This is now Shortcuts version 8, and we're going to be diving into all the changes and new actions found in this year's updates to shortcuts across all the platforms. And in the second half of the show, we'll be diving into App Intents, which will power up Apple Intelligence in 2025. So a very important aspect of shortcuts that is now going to be powering Apple Intelligence. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show. By supporting this show, you'll get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros. Another great way to support the show is by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that's left a review or supports the show financially. With that, here's my discussion with Matthew, all about Shortcuts 8. Welcome back to the podcast, Matthew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so a bit delayed in getting our acts together, but that was a good thing because 18.1 added all sorts of new goodies as well. So,
oh yeah,
yeah. So this is we've been doing this. I feel old. This is Shortcuts version 8, and I believe we've done every single year of so
that is crazy that it's almost been a decade. Like,
oh right,
that's not real, but
yeah.
Congrats on doing the show for so long. That's amazing.
Right, that too. Yeah, you wouldn't know it's version 8 because these days it's just like shortcuts for iOS 18. But I've kept the math going. So
I thought you were going to say it's just you wouldn't know because it's not that much different or something. But.
Well, that too. I mean, it's a light year, as we'll talk about, because Apple Intelligence kind of had the whole company working on different things, including the Shortcuts team for App Intents, as we'll talk about towards the end of the show.
Totally. I think that's kind of what is maybe unsaid sometimes with the Shortcuts updates the last few years is that the groundwork that they're laying has been very important for what's coming next and is super exciting. So excited to talk about it all.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive into just the baseline Shortcuts app on iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, and visionOS. And visionOS is basically the iPad version at this point still. Yeah.
Do you just want to run through the new features? Or?
Yeah. So there's new actions as there are every year, but beyond that, the app itself on iPad and iPhone has like new features to make using shortcuts more pleasant. Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
This is a good. I think I've said this many times on the show before, but it's a great example of filing feedback. I was like, hey. The action groups don't make sense and have just been the same since they were when we were at Workflow. And so I literally laid out, like, you should reorganize them into these groups. And they did it like 2 months later, which was awesome. So the action grouping in Shortcuts is now basically, for lack of a better word, fixed, where things like text and other actions that you didn't really use in the documents category are actually moved into scripting, and a major part throughout all of it is it's just not alphabetical order anymore, which is all it ever was. So it was basically like variables were down at the bottom just because they started with the letter V and not relative to their importance. So a major thing now is the scripting actions are sorted in a logical order that's like, here are the ones you might use the most at the top. And then the ones that are more esoteric and probably for people who listen to this show anyways, but are down further at the bottom. But for me, it's just like nothing has ever changed to make shortcuts easier to understand. And that was a very simple, like, present things in a different order so that it's what you might use first is at the top and what you might use last is at the bottom. And that just getting that into the app alone, I think has a huge impact on just like people open the app and they're like, what do I use in this? And it's because just the first thing they see starts with the letter A rather than the first thing that they should use. So that is like, I'm clearly rambling about it because I love it. And I'm just like, this is what I did at Workflow too. Back in the day was just like, the order of the icons don't make sense. Let's change these into a different order. And I just manually did it all. So Yeah, that's great. They kind of changed favorites into pins now, which is just kind of, I think that's an iOS convention. They kind of switched it from, it's not my favorite, but I want to save it there. So it's just kind of more accurate of a term. Yeah, that stuff is, I think I was just like, how do we get regular people using shortcuts more? And it's just, don't open them to an empty slate that they don't know what tools are available or which ones they should use.
Yeah. Any other usability things worth noting? Like otherwise is...
I mean, there's some like Mac keyboard navigation stuff that I didn't necessarily notice, but is always welcome. I think just in general, you need to be able to use the whole interface from the keyboard with arrows and keys and stuff like that. So that's nice. Even last year, they fixed some of the command tab on the iPad. Never worked for like 4 years straight. And I just was like, please fix this. And that's been fantastic for me, just because I have so many folders that navigating through them means I have to constantly use the cursor and go to the sidebar and things like that. So
yeah,
just being able to arrow through. They added a ton of glyphs though, which is maybe to the everyday person doesn't matter as much, but I used every single glyph at least 3 times over before because I have thousands of shortcuts. So like, of course I'm going to, but now they're just a lot more expressive and things like that, which is nice.
Yeah. And then triggering shortcuts, it can take advantage of the control center now on iPad and iPhone.
That's great.
Is your control center overrun with just pages and pages of these things, or how are you utilizing this?
Yeah, you accurately predicted it, of course. I did it just to try it because I have to, or just because I want to mostly, but because I have that whole fancy focus mode set up, I was like, what if I made one control center for each focus mode? And I literally have not used a single one of them since I set up. So,
because focus modes don't change the control center, right?
No, exactly. That's why it basically doesn't do what I want to.
Yeah.
There's actually a open control center action in iOS 18. I think it's already out, or maybe it's in the 18.2 beta.
I have that on my home screen as the app icon on the bottom left or right now. It's so lovely because I've got a big iPhone screen, and it's a pain in the butt to try to drag from the top right corner. Yeah.
I'd say real-time feedback for the shortcuts team. Add a page parameter to that action so I can open it to the 8th page, which is, of course, like... I always think of the like it's nice for Matthew, or like it's a Matthew problem kind of thing, because I almost know for sure that they have that, like there's a compartment for like some of my feedback that's just like, all right, like this guy needs it, but some the kind of, I'm on iPad Pros, I know you guys would use it too, so,
yeah,
but that totally would make that more functional.
Sure.
And just simply makes sense, but
yeah, because the default behavior is just the last page you were on when you closed it, right?
I don't think I've tested it with the action on if it opens back to the last page, but that's great to know.
I'll give it a go here.
Sure.
So I'm on the 3rd page, and yep. No, goes back to the first.
Yeah, I
page.
thought I went to the first. That's kind of why I hesitated.
Oh, it does. It does too when you close Control Center. In my head, I thought it remembered what page you were on, and it never did that.
Yeah, so that's why that's another, I think it's a classic story of like they kind of first of all, it wasn't in iOS 18, so the 18.0 didn't have it, and then they add it and then the next release, so it's like I would have used that from July 15th or whatever, the first day I got the beta installed, and instead now it's like November and I'm got halfway of what I want for that feature. So I think that's sometimes that is kind of a story with shortcuts, is like by the 18.3 release, it's kind of what you would have wanted with the 18.0, with some of the like niceties for like the action button it timed out when you ran your shortcuts from it. And so like any complicated shortcuts would just stop in the middle of you running them, even though you're interacting with the screen. It like didn't understand. So that can be sort of a bummer, but like the same thing with Control Center is they could add that and make it more useful. But within those Control Center pages, I definitely have some shortcuts that are similar to what I use the action button for, where it basically presents a menu of my other shortcuts for that context. So like I have a video control center page, and I just have a shortcut that's called manage my videos on that page. And when I run it, it shows me my other folders of video shortcuts. So like for me, it was kind of a way to get the similar benefit of the widgets, but it is within any app when you open Control Center, which is great. Action button can do it too, but on the iPad there isn't that. So that's probably where it perfect for this show would be the most beneficial. But just to also, the underside of shortcuts being in Control Center is that all of the controls in Control Center, that's what they're called now, is a control, are powered by app intents, which is the feature that powers shortcuts as well. So every time you tap any Control Center action, you're running an app intent to control that function. And so that's a super powerful thing. All of Control Center is shortcuts now. While you also can run shortcuts from there, it's all powered through the same intent. So anything that's in Control Center is also in shortcuts now, which is awesome too. So this, in addition to that whole new groups of actions in shortcuts, there's now a category for controls specifically. And I don't think third-party developers can add their actions in there. I think I didn't mention this when we were talking about the action groups, but those are now expandable. So I want all third-party actions to be shown inside the shortcuts action groups, because if I go look at documents and it doesn't show my Dropbox shortcuts or like the actions for it, what's the point? I have to go find the Dropbox app. So I do think I can sort of see a future. This is again a good point of like, are they going there, or should I just tell them, hey, you guys should do this? It's I'm always in a weird place having just been on the team, but
sure. And
I didn't have that whole side of Control Center. I mean, that's all them. And
yeah. Then the other side effect with
well.
Control Center shortcuts availability is those can also go on your lock screen, which is a super handy thing as well.
Well, you could already run a shortcut. You mean like the lock screen?
Sorry, in the very bottom where the flashlight used to be.
Totally. That is another addition. Is the I guess, what are they called? I don't think maybe my brain is just
I don't know.
Lost that
just
one.
the bottom
It's just
little
the lock
widget
screen
things, the
controls.
bottom
Yeah.
controls.
Usually there's a developer session about doing the camera capture ones, but you can just run any control there too. But yeah, same. I don't have shortcuts there yet. I think I'm always existentially plagued by like, one shortcut isn't good enough. I need 500 shortcuts in that one button. So that's why I have all these menus every time. But I have a shortcut that's just called run from my shortcuts, and I could put that on the lock screen for sure.
Yeah. And then do we want to dive into the new actions, I guess?
Sure. I mean, I think sort of the highest level one that's worth addressing first is the if action, which has been expanded. That's kind of like the most beneficial all around, or like the low level change is just that now you can have multiple conditions for an action, and you can combine them using like any or all of these conditions. So that's super helpful. I think we still want a switch statement, but this just makes nesting if things way less complicated. I haven't really had the opportunity to implement this myself yet, but it just because sometimes rebuilding my shortcuts that already work to be the exact same way, but take advantage of a new feature is one of those like, don't fix it if it ain't broke situations. But I think going forward, it's definitely super useful. I think this is always interesting. It's like I have over 10 years of experience with shortcuts, and I've only had this for 3 months. So I haven't really internalized using it. And this is usually something that in the spring I get into like, oh yeah, I always think to use this now. But
you don't need to have as convoluted of a shortcut to try to do what you want to do. I remember some of my back in the day had some crazy long shortcuts for all this, trying to get the statements correct. And
yeah, exactly. I think that's where it would be a lot more useful. I'm still having some weird performance issues within nesting stuff where like some of my most complicated shortcuts, if I paste an action, it'll actually be in the wrong place. They've done a lot, like they said that they put a lot of into performance and reliability, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but I can definitely tell on some low level things that were pretty bad of just being very slow for somebody like me. But then there are just something in the action editor and Swift UI as like never meshed the way it did before. Because it is, I don't know, just the way Swift UI works. It's not designed for a 800 action shortcut that has nested things. Like it's basically the reason I'm saying this is I'll try to paste within an if action that's like within 3 repeat loops, and it'll move like an entire set of actions below into the otherwise category for that if action in a way that I didn't do that at all. And something's messed up there. So I'm saying this for myself too, because like those are the worst kinds of feedback that's really hard to like figure out what's happening. And I'm also just like, it burns me out pretty badly that it's like, I just don't want to, like, please just fix it. But I just don't want to deal with it. Like, it sucks to get into some of those situations, but in the long run, as we've seen, we get there slowly. Yeah, some other quick, just to go over the updated actions of iOS 18. Some just nice ones where like they built the reminders action. Originally, there was an action called Open List, and then they added an Open Smart List that just opened the like curated ones, and then they basically fixed the underlying entity. They were essentially built with two different types of intent APIs. So now you can open any of your reminders lists from the one action, which is nice. Another great match text, if you're doing regular expressions and trying to scrape text out of larger groups of text, it'll actually validate your regular expression and tell you whether or not it is a functional one. So that's like, I Google regex validation regularly just to check whether or not something I wrote, because I usually don't even, honestly, just pro tip for anyone listening to the show is use ChatGPT to write regular expressions for your shortcuts, because it's, to me, it's not worth my time. And I probably could learn regular expressions and then it would be fast. But like when I'm like, I want to get this ID from this webpage so I can scrape a YouTube video, like I just put in the HTML and I'm like, write me a regular expression to get this. And then it does it. And I just test it a couple times and then stick that into my shortcut. And it honestly it's a good example of, you can't really like use ChatGPT to build shortcuts for you, but it can accelerate some of those parts that you might not want to do. Or
what are some other examples where regular expression can come in handy within shortcuts?
That one is, match text is for all the work that we did with workflow to like translate programming terms. Like, a regular expression still probably doesn't mean anything to people who don't understand programming, but match text to me still doesn't encapsulate that it is like you can identify patterns within any blobs of text and use it as you need. So like I think it's one of those things that's awful, where it's like you need to have an example to really understand it. But like for something that I do regularly is when I share social media posts or like articles, there's always that open graph data from that's like, this is an article, this is the title, this is the image, all of these things. Shortcuts has actions for stuff like this, but usually there's like a pattern on any web page that's like, this URL is always in the same spot. And so you can basically use shortcuts to take a URL, get the contents of that web page, and then look through the HTML and get that exact information that you need. So like I actually built, this is one super fun. for Apple TV, the TV store, I wanted to be able to add movies and shows to my watch list without physically going and searching for every single one. Because I'll do stuff like, I'm just like, oh, I'll just rewatch Lord of the Rings, and I want to put all 3 movies in my watch list real quick. But then it's like I have to go find them every time, or like look in the related stuff. It's a dumb problem, but it's just like something that I run into regularly. And so Apple has these Apple Media tools where you can basically get like rich metadata about a show, so that anyone who's writing about a show can have like thumbnails or the embed player, so you can click on it and watch the trailer for the movie and stuff like that. And so I figured out that when you go search for a show, that page of results is essentially like an API for looking up movie metadata. And so I figured out if I typed in my own query, if I use shortcuts to fill out my own query and like put in Lord of the Rings, and then it shows me that page, I can get the first result from that page, and it's accurate. It is the Lord of the Rings show, and then the ID for that content on the Apple TV store is in there. And so I went in, looked at that page, looked at the HTML, found where the Lord of the Rings ID was, and then took it to ChatGPT and was like, build me a regular expression to match for this string every time, so that I can always, then I took that, put it in my shortcut. So essentially I type in, it says, what do you want? What show do you want? Downloads the page, gets the ID, and then goes to the next page where it shows the results for Lord of the Rings and adds like the full URL, and like I can get the artwork and stuff like that too if I want to.
Super cool.
So yeah, it's like this. That's one of the major superpowers inside shortcuts that most people don't know how to take advantage of. And for me, literally for me, until like this year, I've known it's powerful, but to take advantage of it requires writing essentially the code that I vowed to never write because I'm using shortcuts. It's all these curly braces and asterisks and like, what is this? Like,
right.
And I can understand it a little bit when I read it, or when, honestly, ask ChatGPT to explain the regular expression to you. It's like a great tool for breaking that down. But it's the kind of thing of like, in the end, I don't really need to know I don't need to know how to do this. I'm just trying to get to my end goal of getting that thing. And so rather than get stuck and read a book on regular expressions, I can just move forward and keep working on my shortcut.
Yeah, like I remember going through back in the day the HubSpot API and their documentation to try to do something in shortcuts, because you can add in this API call in there. And I got to work, but I could imagine, you could tell ChatGPT, look at this API call information and write me something that integrates with my information here.
I will say too, ChatGPT has gotten better at, you can ask it to explain to you how to set up a shortcut. And if you do generally understand shortcuts, like it does get it mostly right. I think it's a good example of like, I'm like the expert at it, so I understand 100% when it's wrong. But if you didn't and don't understand what this action means, it's like it probably does fall apart. So like it's great for me, but I mean, I know better than it still. It's like,
sure,
that is a funny part, but I think it's totally, just to say again, like if you are trying to like get information out of any sort of like specific information out of any document or web page, use the match text action and use ChatGPT to be like, I need this information out of here. Write me a regular expression to do this in shortcuts. And then I think what's helpful is shortcuts. There are a couple different ways to validate regular expressions. And I don't remember if there's like a term for it, but sometimes shortcuts does it one way that some regular expressions validators do it a slightly different way. I don't remember what the exact. I'm trying to remember. There's like one little, like the way it does a certain thing at a certain point. But you can usually, even with ChatGPT, is you're like, it doesn't use that kind of regular expression validation. Use the other one, and it'll figure it out too. So I don't know why I'm pumping ChatGPT so much.
Sure. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Hey, I mean, we could all use an extra.
In December, you can ask Siri to ask ChatGPT about that stuff.
Yeah, it's true. I'd say we could all use a little extra hand every once in a while. So.
Right. Yeah. We forgot to mention you can pin actions now for quick access. Have you done this with any of your favorite actions?
Yeah, I do. I've always had kind of a list of favorites. This is another one where I sent them feedback and they haven't implemented it. And I'm going to say yes, because I still think they should. The problem with the pinned actions is you can't change the order. And so me being someone who's a creature of habit, I want the ones that I want up at the top and some other ones I want to be able to like leave at the bottom. And so in order to do that, I have to write out the list and then add them in reverse order so that the ones that I want are at the top and the newest. So like, it's just like annoying. I haven't done that yet. But I mean, mine are, I guess I could look. That's probably more interesting. Oh yeah, here on the Mac, I have comment, run Apple script, get item from list, choose from menu, get dictionary value, get dictionary from input, if, add to variable, set variable, run shortcut, URL, open URLs, and text. Those aren't in order, for sure, but I do think I have like maybe 500 or more shortcuts that are just opening URLs, and it's often a way to end a shortcut to then resolve back to a web page or into an app through a deep link.
Yeah.
I do a lot of dictionary stuff and extracting information, and I like to design dictionaries. If you pass a dictionary into choose from list, all of the titles of the keys become, it's a rich list, so you can see the titles of the keys and the values in each of your options, which is a fun. You can kind of like, I'll do that I just made some for Blue Sky, and so you can make a dictionary of the title of your list and then the ID of the list, and then when you run the shortcut, you pick from the titles rather than a list of IDs. Is a good example.
Nice. And then I was excited to see Recognize Music now works on watchOS. So you're walking in the mall, you can run this shortcut and save that song that's playing over the overhead speaker.
Yeah, especially I feel like that Shazam has been on the watch
for a while now. Yeah,
some of these are just nice to
Shazam.
Quality.
Shazam many years ago was like the first app that let you play back music on the watch, because it would let you play the 30-second whatever preview out of the watch speaker before
that
Apple.
Is a new feature of
that.
the watches this year.
And I
got really stoked, but then I haven't used it since then.
Yeah, probably for about 4 years or so. This has been on the watch through Shazam, just through that. I use this quite a bit, actually. I find it very useful for, especially with a little kid around. You can play audio out of a watch, and they're not going to want to grab your phone and play with it. So that's a nice little...
I haven't tested, but if you use a play music action on the watch, does it play? I don't think it does, but does it play from the watch?
Oh, I'm not sure. I need to test that.
I'm pretty sure I mean,
the music app is all sorts of weird with like trying to tell your watch where to play it to, like either the phone or the watch. Pocket Cast is one of my favorite apps because it's so clear. This is your music control, or this is your podcast control on your watch. This is your podcast control on your phone. So it's a different area of the UI entirely, and that's so nice. And I wish Apple Music was better about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost guarantee the shortcut sections are not designed for it. I mean, like, it's one of those things where I would want it, and then I would be annoyed that I couldn't do what I wanted or something like that after that. It's like, now it only plays on the watch, and you're like, no, I want it to play on the phone. And then that is like hours and hours of engineering to change that action just to work.
Sure.
And so sometimes it's like, I do understand why that doesn't get prioritized over Apple Intelligence as an entire feature.
Yeah. And then, so as far as new actions, accessibility's got a couple. We've got set switch control, switch state on iOS and visionOS, and then set hover text enabled. It can be enabled or disabled displaying larger versions of text on Mac OS.
Yeah, these they just plug away every year at new accessibility things, which is
they keep forgetting the most important one, the color. I think color filters is still. Let me see. Did they add this? I think this is my white whale. The color filters
on Mac or
on
Vision.
Well, on the watch would be amazing because that doesn't exist at all, just in the OS. But I think just on iOS and iPad OS.
No, they've had set color filters for a while.
Have they?
To do the grayscale thing?
To do red scale.
I mean, I think you have to set your color filter in accessibility, and then this turns it on.
Yeah, never mind. It does work. Oh, look at that. I thought this is
your wish has been
absent.
Granted.
So yeah, magic. It's been here for many years, and I didn't even realize.
No, you're good. I mean, it isn't. Like I was saying, it's just turn it color filters on or off. So even the grayscale thing, you need to understand that like you have to have the color filters feature set to grayscale, and then doing this will trigger it.
They're totally in accessibility should be two things. There should be grayscale, and then there should be the red color thing, because I could see people wanting both.
Does it? If you have both, it might ask you to pick.
Because you have to go back in accessibility and settings and actually change what you want to be at that time.
Okay.
There should be some saved
there's still always
presets. Yeah.
There's always room to grow with accessibility controls. I mean, just in general, I've had shortcuts that use the deep links into settings for years. And they even just added, we're like skipping ahead, but in 18.2, they added an open app store that I used to have deep links for. It's like, add the frickin' settings app, add shortcuts to open into the settings app. I mean, the real...
And pick from the different areas of the settings, yeah.
The real win would be to change the settings. Yeah, not just open. I think that's probably why, like, it's maybe a half measure and they'd rather get all of the accessibility or every single setting in as a control type thing, which is, again, like, they haven't done it now, but by building app intents as a feature of controls, they easily can do this in the future. So I think that's where I'll get into it later. But what the work they've done with app intents is worth taking. Like, it enables so much more in a much easier way in the future. So we should be able to see a lot more coming. And I'm still curious if they intentionally held back some features that they would have released for shortcuts, but to make it go all out when Apple Intelligence rolls out for real. That's maybe, I hate to say this on the iPad Pros, but that feels dangerously in the territory of, oh, we'll get it next year on iPad OS, like that.
Yes, it does.
That feeling. Yeah.
For a while we were on iPad land. Everyone was like, okay, every other year is a big iPad year. And now we just don't know, there's no pattern anymore. There used to be a pattern every other year. Now the pattern is broken and we're just, hoping.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, maybe we could save some of this for the Apple Intelligence part, but like, it is fascinating as every feature will route through app intents in some way to function, that like there aren't as many unique features per platform as you do just get this stuff across platform, which is great. And it's hard to I definitely experienced this talking with Chris Lawley, who's very embedded in the iPad world as well, is it's like, technically iPad OS 18 isn't exciting on its own, but as an ecosystem, it's better than it's ever been. And even something like App Intents rolling out in the long run gives iPad OS legs that like developers just didn't care for before, because it took extra work, versus build once and run it everywhere with App Intents is really compelling. Will
App Intents let me record audio on my iPad and do podcast recording?
I mean, no, of course not. I mean, but like audio as a because they're usually live activities. I mean, that one is definitely not as
because you need mic access to two places at once. Basically, is the problem. You need,
but there's a thing where like if they build out intents so that you can run audio intents, that can be a mechanism for that feature to work. So I think that's a huge thing that I always just got working from workflow and seeing a little bit of shortcuts before. I mean, it wasn't even called shortcuts at the time, but just seeing how they work is just like, they can't just make stuff happen. Like, it does have to have a way for the audio to work across into routes. And so
it has to
they built a system for apps to trigger their functions and happen outside the app, even when it's not open. So like, that is the issue with how iPad OS was built and why audio can't work when the app isn't. Two different apps that aren't open can't record audio, because otherwise that's a security issue. So like, I think that's where we slowly get there. And then sometimes it is like, I don't know. I mean, sometimes too, like, they didn't even think of that until it's built as well. And
yes. Yeah.
So we have been hoping for something that wasn't actually coming the whole time. But no, I mean, I think that always remains to be seen. iPad is in a weird state. Maybe we could do a higher level part at the end about it is just like hard to tell compared to when Shortcuts was only on iPad. It was very clear to me the benefit compared to the Mac. And now I can do a lot of this on the Mac as well. And it's kind of confusing for me sometimes.
Sure.
But
yeah.
Let's keep going on the actions.
Let's keep going. So Freeform got some actions, create board and open board. I'm not a freeformer, but this is cool. They're getting some stuff.
I think it's nice. Again, I think you'll see as we go through a lot of these that a lot of these make sense in the context of Apple Intelligence, that if you're, and Vision Pro, a lot of times, that if you're sitting there and you want to create a new freeform board, you can just ask Siri and she'll do it, rather than, oh, I can't do that. It's like, why not? So I think I think Apple especially is going to be adding a lot of these very basic, just create open type stuff, because anytime you're in an app, all of those functions should be addressable with Siri. These are on iPad OS and iOS last year and not on Mac OS. And I think even Open Board didn't really work right. It always opened the app every single time instead of asking if you didn't pick one. So just basic quality of life stuff. But Freeform's pretty slick when you find a good function for it. Like, I use it to plan videos, and then they have the new scenes thing, which I think would be, I was doing some sketching for designing an intent for I do consulting for app intents clients now. And I wanted to take them through action by action and be like, here's what this one is and the next one. And you can kind of just advance through, which is nice.
So next, I think I found a typo on Apple Support's document about what's new in Shortcuts, Matthew.
What?
So we're looking at your blog post, which is a copy and paste from Apple's support page. Now, the Journal app does not exist on the iPad. And I just verified you cannot do Shortcuts integration with an app that does not exist on the iPad. So create entry, create audio entry, and search entries are available on iOS. And
it says and iPad OS.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Was the Journal app supposed to launch this year?
Confirmed. Yeah, I mean, straight up, like, I can't say yes, but last year we got actions for the Photos app called Open Collection. And there wasn't really a collections feature in the Photos app. And now they've redesigned Photos to work for collections. And it totally, I saw somewhere that Photos was supposed to release last year and didn't. So I mean, it's like,
sure,
no surprise that Journal should come to iPad, and they probably have done it, and it's probably just not there yet.
It's the most obvious place to journal. It is literally a notebook that has an Apple Pencil where you could write out your journals, and it'll be lovely.
It could be the case that whoever wrote this has Journal for iPad OS.
It's like it's on my iPad. I don't know what
they
you're talking
just
about.
don't realize that. I have perhaps made a mistake in the past where I talked about a feature that I had that wasn't released yet. And it was like, delete that. So we'll see. This is the canary in the coal mine. If this article gets updated sometime after somebody really listens to this episode,
it's like, oh, oopsie. Oh gosh. But that's very cool. Create audio entries, especially, I think pretty nifty. Just like, hit that and immediately start speaking,
Totally. I'm very down for all the just simple create new thing because you know what? Did I make I did make a shortcut for that. I was going to say, I didn't realize I had, but just building that habit too. I think the journal ones in particular, it weirded me out because I'm like, oh, I just want to use the journal feature. But if you just create an entry, you can still use those automatic categories afterwards. So I think I spent a lot of time not really using this. And then I was like, oh, it works the way I want it to.
Yeah, and the create entries, it's got a lot of things in there. You can add media items, location, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's nice. I've got a whole set on my website if people want them. I can put it in the show notes.
Very cool. Then the magnifier we have now. Describe this, detect this, start point and speak, open reader and start activity.
Yeah,
seems like
I
a
think
lot.
this is what I was thinking of with the other accessibility ones. This is essentially another accessibility one, but within it, there's those features for. This is all the stuff that they basically trained Vision OS on. Also, if you think about it, because it's able to. They've had these accessibility features for years of like, is there someone in front of me? Like, so that I can see that if I'm blind, I can see who is it and stuff like that. But I feel like that's the kind of stuff that it's not like in a creepy way. It's the same technology as how they have like presence detection on Vision OS of did someone walk into the room?
Sure. Yep. Which that'll be interesting if Vision OS starts to add things like that that are more like an augmented reality view of your world, like this person is over here, and
Yeah, I wonder if I guess Magnifier isn't on. I was going to say that's not on Vision OS.
It is not.
If
no.
you could run these shortcuts and have it.
Yeah,
I mean, that
cool.
starts to get into the creepy territory of
A little
describe
bit.
this, and it's just like you're wearing this in front of me.
Yeah, like if your Vision Pro could track your cat and it like remembers it saw your cat go under the bed and can like tell you your cat was last seen under the bed or something. One day. Set music focus filter. How is this new? I thought you could set focus filters in the past.
Yeah, I don't understand. Sometimes I'm like, I swear we had this. I mean, maybe it was only on Mac OS is the point, but it's the listening.
But is there a
history.
separate focus filter that's like music that's not?
Well, it's listening history. So this is basically kid mode is.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you have like a focus, you can, or it's also just like family mode. Like there's like when I'm just listening at work, use my listening history. But if anyone's using my phone or my iPad, turns it off. So it's kind of like, don't screw up my Apple Music end of
Okay,
year.
so yeah, you can turn on and off listening history as a toggle. So
Yeah.
I could theoretically not have Raffi be overtaking all my recommendations.
Yeah. But I think I haven't thought of just using this, or I've thought of it, I haven't done it, but of just turning it on for 2 hours and turning it off rather than, I think what's hard about focus filters is it does feel like you need to have them set up already.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's what these actions can kind of provide is rather than just activating one that already does exist, is it's like throw one on now and turn it off without me ever having to include it in the focus filter settings. So I'm partially saying this for my own sake because I don't use these still. And because I still think of them as I have to tie them to a focus mode and turn it on. But like this is like a way to get the focus filter function on the fly without it actually be just a filter. It's like, I think these are just poorly named. It's like accurate about what's happening, but the fact that this is toggle listening history, but it's titled set mucus filter is just like, wow.
The one thing I want for the listening history thing is just a system-wide setting on Apple TV to never remember anything I play on the Apple TV, because that's such a shared environment that is very...
Is it not?
annoying. No, it's not there as far as I can tell.
I feel like do you ever go into like the individual app settings? Because it might be in the music.
Oh, I don't know. I've not...
There is...
I thought I've looked, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, I went... For a while, I was trying to make like a whole guide to Apple TV, because it's like pretty complete as a thing.
And no one in our household will ever use profiles. That's just a lost cause.
Yeah. See, we actually do that mostly because I like it, and I... But you can use a shortcut to set a profile as you trigger it, but it requires you to be running the shortcut.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The next one is from the Wallet app, Open Card, and this is kind of a nifty one. So when you do this, you can select which card you want. So say you're a frequent subway goer, for whatever reason, you can pick the subway rewards card when you like go to your subway, and it'll load that up for you. So so that's kind of interesting, where if there's different stores that have rewards cards, you can have that.
But all credit cards too. And
yeah,
I basically have a widget now that's just like, which card do I need to pull up? And it's got shortcuts for each of them.
Yeah. So I don't find a ton of utility here, because on the phone, you just double click. On the watch, you double click. I mean, it's nice that it picks out different cards, I guess. But
this could be interesting with automations, where you go to the coffee shop and it literally opens the card for you immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And like the one, or even card pointers. Do you know that app from?
I've heard of
Emmanuel?
it.
Yeah, it's a credit card rewards app, and it's basically like, which card should I use?
Mm-hmm.
And so it can literally open the card that you should use at the right place, that's pretty cool. Man, I think this is a good example of like, it's just dumb not to be able to do this with shortcuts, and you can probably with Siri as well. So like, put it in, same thing of like, just why prevent us from doing it? You should just give us these functions regardless. And that's the main function of the Wallet app, is showing a card.
Yeah, I really want to test this on VisionOS to see what it does, because I don't think there's a Wallet app there. It probably throws you in the settings like on iPad, because iPad doesn't have a Wallet app either. But I'm going to go look in.
Yeah.
What
Did both of these just...
Is this a typo, or does it work?
Teaser Wallet app on iPad OS. No, you can use cards on iPad OS, though. It's not as a...
This action does not exist on iPad OS. FYI.
Three pieces of feedback just for the show notes, or their feedback. That's fine.
Yeah, when I search for Open Card, it brings me Open Group from Card Hop and Open Board from Freeform. That's
well, again,
yeah.
I wish I was... That this is not a complete real thought, but like,
sure.
I wish I was like one of those accounts that's just like, Apple confirmed iPad Wallet app coming to iPad OS, and then it's like 10 million views on
totally.
It's like...
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not there on VisionOS if there's no app. Because I thought maybe it's going to pull you into the settings app to show you your card balance or whatever, but no.
That's a pretty specific inclusion of those two platforms and not macOS. That
right.
Is like, where does that come from? So
yeah,
we'll see another canary. We're going to be finding 3 dead canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah, we'll see next year. You heard it first year. Got the wallet, and we got the journal. So shortcuts, you can create folders and create iCloud links for shortcuts on all platforms now. And you can add shortcuts to home screen, which was there before, I thought.
You've been able to, but you haven't been able to use an add to home screen action. So what you can do is take a list, like a text list, repeat with each, and then, sorry, I was thinking of create shortcut. I've built I got to back up in a second, but these are all my favorite ones, and this is why, like, technically it's a small year, but also it's like a big year for the workflow of using shortcuts, which is, I think, important because we all kind of got stuck, I think, in the middle a little bit. But add to home screen, even then, is you can just use, like, you can make a whole folder of the people do it for like the Korean K-pop singers, like the whole aesthetic home screen thing. You can just make a whole folder of like the singers' names that you want to add to the home screen, and then instead of going through one by one and adding them, you can repeat through with a list using shortcuts. Like you can automate the process of adding them to the home screen.
Very cool.
So I have shortcuts too, where I've been trying to make them for Xbox games, where I take the artwork from the Xbox game and then a shortcut that uses the Google Assistant app it opens Google Assistant, and then that has an action that accepts text. And so I say, open this game on my Xbox. And so I have all of my Xbox games basically in a folder on my iPad home screen that I can tap on, and it'll open the thing and open it on my Xbox. And basically it's like not worth it to go through and do that 45 times.
This seems like a very, like, it's like, is the Xbox UI that horrible to make you want to?
No, this is just because I can, for sure. Okay. But I mean, similarly, what was the other one that I did? I mean, like TV shows and movies, I've been building like shortcut using that watch list thing. I've been building separate shortcuts back to those movies, so I can just tap Lord of the Rings and it'll open, or it'll show me a list even. And then it's like, I put that one on my home screen. So like, I'm trying to just find more ways to surface shortcuts. I think that's a major goal of mine a lot of times is I have so many, and there's so many opportunities, but if they're always just behind the shortcuts icon, most people aren't going to use them. And so putting them on the home screen, and actually not just, I think I've gone deep on widgets, but for a lot of people that's not necessary or sustainable, versus I could have put, if I had this, I might not have done the widget thing at all. And I had at one point like 2,000 shortcuts on my home screen, and I added every single one of them manually, and it was a waste of time. So that's a good example of like, this could do that in 5 minutes rather than me spending 8 hours tapping those buttons. So like and again, to the average person, whatever, but to the person who uses shortcuts, this add to home screen, create iCloud link, create folder, these are huge. Like we don't get workflow improvements inside shortcuts, and we got 3 this year, like, and 4 plus if action and then action regrouping. So like, it's kind of a major year for the shortcuts app itself and how you interact with it if you're like a power user. So create folder, also just being able to take a new folder or just be like, I want to make a folder for Blue Sky. I can type in the word Blue Sky, create a folder. I can use the create shortcut action. Once that folder is open, if you use the create shortcut action, it'll add shortcuts in that folder. And so now I can, when I'm like, I have a new idea, I can type in the name, create a new folder, open that folder, and create 8 shortcuts that I know I'm going to build for that programmatically rather than me. So like, this is my favorite year. This is the Matthew year. But like, we have had workflow and shortcuts for 8 years, and the people who build in it the most have never gotten tools to make it easier to work with. And so like, the community is worse off because people like you and me have a hard time actually using this app because it's not built for power users. And so like, these affordances like make the entire app more worth it on a very base level for like the everyday person. The create iCloud link for shortcut, you can't link to things that you make in this app. And it's like wild to think about. Every other app has a URL for it that you can share on the App Store. Every web page, we all know that. But then you have shortcuts, and you have to generate iCloud links every single time. It's like, this doesn't fully solve that problem, but now you can pass a shortcut into this action and create a link. There was I'm getting in a rant because I'm excited, but this is a good thing. There was a pop-up in the first iteration of this where it said, do you want to share these? And then you hit share, and this essentially how the feature worked when you pressed create iCloud link. And I thought they were intentionally suppressing me from because that means that it can only create a link. You have to confirm it every time. And so if you repeat through a list of shortcuts and create a link for it, you had to press confirm for every single shortcut. And so for me, I make shortcuts in groups and share them. So I'd have to press create iCloud link 10 times. But I'm blanking on his name right now. And I feel awful because he's like the main person in the shortcuts community. iBanks is like one of the shortcuts moderators and does an amazing job in the community. And he basically asked them, because I just hadn't asked for it. He was like, please take away that confirmation dialog because it means people like us can't actually use this action the way that we want to. And so now I can take a whole list of all my shortcuts and run it through that action, and it'll just create them for me programmatically. So this was a block in my workflow. Every single time I made a shortcut, I would always have to then upload them into Airtable and then go one by one and create iCloud links and paste them into Airtable before I could publish them onto the web. So just to like back up fully to the beginning, you can now share shortcuts easily. This action just makes it anybody can create and share a shortcut and share them in a batch. And I think this will be super important for just the shortcuts community of just like, how do I maintain a collection of shortcuts? I can back them up with iCloud links.
Nice.
And then just to continue one last meta thing that isn't obvious with these, there's an action in the shortcuts command line interface that I didn't know was there and got added sometime in the last year or two.
There's a command line interface of shortcuts?
Yeah, just in general. I guess maybe we never covered that, but you can.
Is this Mac only?
Yeah, for sure. So that's probably why we never talked about it. But yeah, no, on the Mac you can run shortcuts there. That's how you sign shortcuts. That's a thing that Federico had a way for a while where you can generate shortcuts on the Mac and from like a plist and then sign them as like I made this shortcut and it'll turn into a real shortcut.
Wild.
Yeah. So like for a while I was taking all my folders of shortcuts and basically scraping the data out and putting them inside a new shortcut with the choose from menu action. And then signing those and basically creating this bundle shortcut. But it kind of broke down for me because I already have thousands. Suddenly I had 400 other bundles that did the same thing that I couldn't update. All of the titles were the titles of my shortcuts, which I'd really have to like remake every shortcut to make it like a real shortcut and not just a menu. So that kind of fell apart for me, but functionally it's still really powerful. But fully setting that aside, which is like awesome and people should look into, and you should as well if you do have it, because you do have access to Mac of just but the command line interface this year added a sort action. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but basically I had no idea how to use this, and I threw a Elgato party at WWDC for like Stream Decks to give away and stuff, and some of the shortcuts team attended, and Ari, who used to be my boss at Workflow and was basically the main founder, gave me a shortcut that uses this command line interface to set the sort order of your shortcuts folders on the Mac. It basically moves a folder to the top, and then if you repeat through a list of your folders, it'll slowly move them to the top. And if you do it in reverse order, it'll put them in the order that you want and everything. But basically this means all those times that Shortcuts has blown up my folder order because of sync issues, I can basically run this shortcut and it sets it back to exactly what I want. And so tying this into the create folder action is now I have an action that can create a new folder and put it at the top of my library. so that I can work on it right away and access it rather than down at the bottom. And so like my workflow around using shortcuts has gotten more advanced this summer. And I think my priorities have been split a little bit with Apple Intelligence. So I haven't fully like sped forward as the way that I can, but there's a lot of cool stuff that just makes, if you're trying to be a shortcuts creator, it's definitely a little bit easier now to make your shortcuts, put them in the right place. I think this might be in the new, I mean, we could get to it in just a second, but in 18.1, there's also move shortcut and rename shortcut. And so you don't have to, you can create them, move them into a folder, create a folder, move the folder, rename the shortcuts in the folder. The one thing you can't do is change the icons, and I would love that. But
Yeah.
I don't even think rename shortcut. I don't think I've used that yet. And I rename every single one of my shortcuts. So again, great workflow improvements there.
Yeah. And then, so 18.1 added some new things, and 18.2 added, and we'll get to more 18.1 things in a second, but jumping the gun to December when everyone will have 18.2, there's a new action, get current or visible app. Now, what are the ramifications of this action?
This is very much, it's new, so I don't have like a full download on it yet, but it's very important for Apple Intelligence and just kind of controlling your Siri experience when you're within apps, because there's always been a feature that's get what's on screen, or it's not always, but it's been there for a couple of years. It essentially doesn't really work unless you're looking at a web page or some specific types of content. But once we're in the world of Apple Intelligence, and I'll just quickly drop, but we can get into this later. Basically, all the personal context feature is powered by App Intents, and essentially all the content in your apps are called entities, and those are provided to the system so that it can kind of understand what's happening. When we're in that world, there's just going to be a lot more contextual Siri commands and actions like that. So you'll want to, if you get anywhere beyond the basic Apple Intelligence experience of like, hey, take this and move it into this app. If you're like, well, when I'm in this app, but sometimes I'm in this app, I want it to happen, you'll probably have to switch from a basic Siri command into making your own custom shortcut. And then at that point, you can be like, okay, if this app is open, do this. But if this app is open, do this. You basically can't do that in shortcuts right now. You can on the Mac, but it's not the exact same way it works as well. But then even on iPad OS, if you're using Control Center, or my mind just blanked, Universal Control, and you have 4 apps open, which one is it? Not, that's what the visible apps thing is as well. Plus, there's just the negative case of there's no apps, and just like I'm on the home screen. So then you can essentially now have this other layer. This is sort of tied in with the if action, but there's so much context that you can have in a shortcut, and then have it, if this is happening, do something here. If not, do this. Last year they added the device orientation or your physical movement. So now you can have it like, if this app is open and the screen is upside down and I'm moving in a car, then do this. Otherwise, if multiple apps are open, so like, this is probably why the if action needed to be expanded on, because you can just have so many different conditions now. But just that very basic one of like, if I'm in Twitter, do this, but if I'm in Facebook, do this. Those are the worst example apps I could have picked, but
yeah. But yeah, super interesting. And yeah, I wonder how it would handle like split screen on iPad, like if both of these are open. Yeah.
You could essentially say visible apps, and it's like, then if Twitter is, and yeah, you just use the if action afterwards.
Yeah, so what's the difference between current and visible?
That's where I think current just means, well, it's also in Universal Control, the active window, like where my cursor is. And
I
typing
see.
Versus,
which would be current.
So that's kind of just gives you, it's more like get current app on the iPhone is like, what app am I using and is there an app? And then on the iPad, it's like beyond, there is just like which one is currently working, but do I have these other ones open as well?
I see.
Yeah.
And then I discovered a shortcut action this year. I'm very proud of this. The spatial photo and spatial video capture was added in September alongside the OS. Basically, the camera app was updated alongside the iPhone 16s, which means spatial capture less hidden away, and it was a frontline, swipeable thing. When they did this, it turns out they also add the shortcuts at the same time, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think it's probably just because all new iPhones have the feature, whereas only some of them before did.
Right, and before it was so annoying to activate that. You had to go in the video, and then you had to hit the little icon on the screen to enable it. Like, it was, not great.
I have this in a stack in my today area, the widget of like, I have a stack of basic controls for like the first one is AirPods, the second one is HomePods, and then down at the bottom is camera, and then there's like restart the device is the next stack. So I like the just functional access to quick controls there from the lock screen basically.
Yeah.
Too.
I love being able to just hop into different parts of the camera because that app is so many options these days. Yeah.
You could totally have like a Vision OS mode, a focus mode, and then on the lock screen, it is set to the spatial capture instead of the normal camera.
Totally.
That's a good example of like, you might not run a shortcut just to open the spatial camera, but putting it in a control in the right spot means you will use it. And so that's where, even again, going back to like just any of these other sort of simple open things are just like, now you have that control anywhere, which is great.
Totally. Yeah. And then what else in 18.1 is worth mentioning?
I mean, we talked about Control Center. That's definitely helpful. I mean, there were just quick, like the App Store, you can open into different sections. I think they kind of got one of them wrong. You can open into the account page, but I think this almost seems like it was lost in translation. What I want, because I have this is basically Sherlocking me. Not that I didn't build it or whatever, but I have shortcuts for this exact thing. And what I want is when you tap on your picture in the App Store, it shows like apps, subscriptions, purchase history, and then your updated apps. And I refresh there and update my apps. Mm-hmm. And they have it go to, there's a sub page there that's called account rather than accounts. And it shows like your actual account details, but I don't ever care about that. I just want to go update my things. And so like, I feel like they got this like directionally slightly wrong, that it should be one level up of just like, take me to my updated apps, because that's what I'm trying to see. Which is just totally random. I was like, oh, you were so close, but you just like went one level too deep. Yeah. And then same thing for the health app. They've had donated actions for years where if you go into the sleep category, it'll provide the sleep donation to shortcuts, and then you can get back there. But you basically had to go through and open every single category, which I did, and I made shortcuts for. But it's like, of course, no one else is going to do that. Now there's just like open data type. So you can go in and just open to your like respiratory rate quickly and stuff like that. But again, sometimes these are like, oh, it's just like an open page action, but it's like, let me check on my health. Like that is one of the only things that matters in life. And just kind of accessing this data that's already provided and you might not check on regularly is also great. I mean, another one is check in with the messages. That's a new feature that they added just to the OS level of kind of like the ETA thing, but more for safety and like, I got home okay. So you can create a check-in with shortcuts. And I really like just triggering Spotlight search, because a lot of people, especially once the action button got here, like you wanted Control Center on your iPad home screen, search and Spotlight it's like, if I'm holding the phone, I have to like pull my thumb down, or like, even I know some people who still don't even understand that Spotlight trying to explain to someone how to run open Spotlight for the first time is kind of wild. You're like, hold the screen and pull it down, but not quite that way. Like, just all like, I'm basically referring to my girlfriend's mom when I explained it to her. She had never even found search, because it's just like, why would you do that on the screen unless you know about it? So yeah, I think this is a good setup for just Apple Intelligence stuff of everything needs to be addressable with Siri, and especially any new commands. And then essentially all of Apple Intelligence and App Intense is shortcuts actions. Like, it is just, you ask Siri to search and she runs this shortcut that opens Spotlight. And I think that's something that I don't remember if we talked about on the show, but App Intense has been around for like 2 to 3 years now, and is how shortcuts works. That used to be called Custom Intense, and developers could build their custom actions. And I think the thing that I never really realized at the time was you can't do what you want. You weren't able to build the functional find actions like we've always had in workflow, and just some basic ways to like combine data or provide it were never really available. And then a couple years ago, I mean, years before that, they started working on it, but then a couple years ago, they made that switch. And I kind of like didn't notice totally. I think it might have happened in 2020, which is maybe why. Like, it was just a little distracting at the time, and to just fully understand what changed wasn't really relevant to me as a shortcuts creator. But then I basically, I mean, in the long run, it has been disappointing to see what could be built and how many people actually adopted it. And so I think it's been a struggle in the shortcuts community of like waiting for people to build actions, but then they don't build them because not enough people are yet. And I saw the biggest sea change in opinions I've ever seen in real life from the day before WWDC until the day after. Because it basically was like, I think developers have always been interested in shortcuts, but for a lot of times they need to see the return, and they need to be able to understand what it is they're supposed to do and get users have the value out of it. So I think a lot of what shortcuts was before has been like nice for power users, or there is this app shortcuts are great for interacting with Siri. But then that middle ground is kind of lost.
Yeah, because like, is
also,
it worth the effort? Is like,
yeah, and it's kind of like another thing to do. Whereas the way they've built it now is, do you want to use widgets? Do you want to use Control Center? Do you want to use the lock screen? All of those just run an intent. So now all the work you need to do is to build intents for your app and what are the main functions of your app. And then you basically design it to fit into a system feature after that point. But in the process, you have essentially built out a full set of shortcuts actions for shortcuts users, while also just making them like a widget and all of these other things. So it's been awesome. I mean, I think that still was all like cool, but to build all your features as intents is still just like more work. And I think most of the time they don't really know what that means. Like, they don't think of it the way we do in shortcuts, where it's, I want to add things, I want to get them, I want to delete, remove, do all this stuff. Like, it's a lot of, it's called CRUD in programming. It's create, no, I just said an acronym and didn't immediately. What is it? Create, update? No.
I'm not sure.
Sorry. Okay. It's create, read, update, and delete, where this is essentially what every API allows you to do as well. When you're working with the shortcuts get contents of URL action, you have create, or you have get, post, update, and delete. That's a CRUD. It's instead of get is read also, basically. So essentially, a lot of developers are kind of building, here's one thing that you can run as a app shortcut. But what Apple is telling people for Apple Intelligence is basically, everything your app does should be an app intent. That was like a thing they said, that sentence. It was anything your app does should be an app intent, not just the most important features. It's all of what your app does should be addressable with an intent, because then when if you're in an Apple Intelligence world where you're expecting to be able to do everything with your voice, you want to say, move this to another folder, and it just works. And the way they've built app intents is that is actually possible. And it's basically, as if you're a shortcuts user, it's basically just running shortcuts with all these parameters pre-filled out, or asking you which one of them isn't available yet to fill out that information in real time. And it basically takes that information and passes it through a shortcut, an intent, and sends it into the app. It's incredibly powerful. And I think the reason it becomes this like Apple special sauce is the content that you use within your apps. They call them entities because it's basically, content is just an awful word, and an entity is kind of a engineering term to just refer to like the main concept of your app. Because if you have a trail app, you're working with trails. You're not working with a web page that represents a trail. It's like the trail is this thing. And they have similar to, do you know the content graph in Workflow back in the day, Tim? And
vaguely. It's been a
it's
while.
Essentially in the engine that was built out Workflow to, when you have like a photo and you pass it into a text action, rather than saying, I'm a photo, that doesn't work. It gets the name of the photo, and it intelligently takes the content and breaks it down into component parts, and basically maps out all the possible connections, so that if it hits a point where it can't accept the photo, it goes back up the graph and goes out to the text instead. They basically, inside Apple, they built that on steroids. It's called transferable. And so it's a way for essentially any content type to gracefully fall back to a different content type when it's not available. So a good example is those trails. If you pass that to a file, what is it? It's not a trail. That has metadata associated with it, but it doesn't know. So developers can define when it is passed as a file, it should turn into a PDF that shows you the photo of the trail and all the information. And they can design essentially like a nice, rich metadata card, similar to the Open Graph tabs for websites. It's like you can tag up your content so that when it gets passed to a specific app, rather than just breaking down, it's like, oh, I just converted it into a PDF of that. That altogether basically means any type of content from any app can pass through shortcuts and app intents, and the entity that's in that app can gracefully fall back into a different type for a different app correctly, which basically means that all apps can work together and all the different types can work together through app intents and shortcuts actions. But when you do it with Siri, it's basically this Apple Intelligence experience where it's personal context. It understands, I know Tim and I have this contact. And what's cool about it too is it's secure. Like the entity securely passes off just the information that it needs to know to the intent, and the intent fills out the information in that other app. It's not that app can access my contacts and see everybody, even though I only need your first name. So like that's what's uniquely Apple in many ways, and like uniquely shortcuts, sort of shortcuts is this secure. I mean, calling it secure might not be super accurate, but it's this route for this information to go that you basically know what's happening and you can see what information is going where, and it can't access things it's not supposed to. Like you can build your own shortcut to do dumb things, but the app intents and the way these hook together is very well considered, which is, I think, why it's taken a while to get right. And I think also like developers I don't know who understands this the way that I just described it. Like, I don't think developers get that you should build out a full suite of essentially shortcuts actions, and then anything in your app can be addressable via app intents and Apple Intelligence, and it's all going to be secure too. And so like, this is where I just saw there's a rumor that like the LLM Siri isn't coming until 2026. And I was saying to someone that like the version of Apple Intelligence that they're selling you in commercials is one thing. The version of Apple Intelligence of what it actually is, and like built on app intents and powered by entities that are securely provided to Siri, is a separate thing.
Sure.
And then Siri as an LLM that you can just talk to is what people actually want, and is still a year and a half away.
Yeah, the commercial with like Ellie from The Last of Us of who did I meet with for coffee 2 weeks ago? It's like, that is just a fantasy.
Yeah,
right
I mean,
now.
those are cringy. Like, well, that part technically, I think the part of the Apple Intelligence like magic sprinkle on top is that really is just saying that's the define context action with 4 filters on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the show result action. So like, it is possible. But I do think they're overselling how well that'll work. But
yeah,
I think what's fascinating about Apple Intelligence or App Intent specifically is last year and the year before that, they added semantic matching where you can ask app shortcuts for your apps, which are, I don't know how much we've gone over that, but just quickly, an app shortcut is an instance of any intent. So like if you have that open app store action that we just got, app shortcuts for that would be every single page that's available. It can pre-create a shortcut where you can just say, open the games tab, rather than it saying open the app store, which tab, the games tab. It can pre-fill those 4 different, or those 8 different options and create shortcuts for you. And so basically, I totally just lost my train from before that as I explained it.
I mean, you're saying how the stuff already exists, semantic.
Oh yeah, with the semantic matching, basically you don't even have to get the titles of those app shortcuts right. Like you can just say like open Apple Arcade, and I mean like that maybe is too easy of an example to get right, but
Sure.
like I have one that's called Get Weather Report, and if I say what's the weather, or like I don't know if that again that's such a generic term sometimes, but like it's run my shortcut when I didn't use the trigger phrase, and I was like, what?
Oh, that's weird because Siri
it
will
matched
just
it.
do the weather if you ask it too as well.
Yeah, but I think it basically matched it. It knew that I was trying to run my shortcut, and like that was maybe again not the best example because I might have trying to just been ask it what the weather was, but it does have that matching where like you basically can get 1 or 2 words wrong, but it creates synonyms. Developers can provide synonyms, which is super helpful, but it also is like, okay, well, you left out the word the, like, I get it. Like, it's added that level of intelligence in 2023. And I think it's just a thing where, like, we just didn't report on it, sort of. And it was like one thing at the end of the shortcuts developer sessions, but like, that's been around and they've trained it for 12 months or 24 months. And so I think some of that stuff is like, because we don't see it actively demonstrated, it seems like they haven't done that yet. But like some of those features, this is why I got excited, just because I uniquely had been combing through all of those and understood that all of this semantic matching stuff and the parameterization of your app shortcuts means that in Apple Intelligence, you can have all of these Siri commands while only building one intent. So like there's this whole level of what even is this? Oh, no, thank you, Siri. Sorry, I turned my HomePod. I think this is what's fascinating about shortcuts as a app is if you look at the point release updates and what they've added, there's new functions and I do love the workflow improvements too. That's very welcome. But like, it does seem like it's like, what are they doing? When at the long run, what they released this year is now every app can build a full set of shortcuts actions, and they will. Like, they have a good reason to. And that was the sea change from before WWDC to after, was everybody was like, I'll think about when to do app intents, versus in some ways app intents was like the only thing to do this year. And it is like, now it's the main headlining feature. So like half of Apple Intelligence is shortcuts. And I think it's not obvious though, unless you're kind of paying attention there. And so that's where like it almost seems like shortcuts might be petering out, when at the same time, this is like the start of actual adoption for functions in shortcuts. And I think going back to even like the ChatGPT discussion, I think they just need to make it easier to make shortcuts. I think it's too hard. You have to rely on someone like me to teach you the scripting actions, when what I know about shortcuts is there's a certain logic to it. And like, they need to train we need Matt GPT. No. I'm not that arrogant, but I have thought before about like, when I talk to ChatGPT, I'll like lay out these like, here's why I build my shortcut this way. Here's why I name my shortcuts these ways, and like I capitalize proper nouns when it's followed by an improper noun or whatever. Like, I have this whole system for how I operate with shortcuts there are certain parts of logic to it. And I wish there was a LLM for me that's like, I know I want to build this shortcut, and I could tell it, hey, do my dictionary thing, and it could build it for me that way. So like that future of what shortcuts could be, plus like, oh man, I just want it on the Vision Pro with like Minority Report style. If I can just sit in my room and be like, dictionaries and stuff and throwing it all around. Oh man, that's the coolest, just for the future of programming for me, is like, yeah, and then have the LLM build it alongside me as well, and I can see what's happening. Like, that's just another point of like, that's what I have always loved about shortcuts is, and I'm super curious of the long term with Apple Intelligence, is when it does have all these actions it's taking and context it understands, and I do this every month, it should build that shortcut for me. It should get to these advanced levels that I think it has the opportunity now, because all these intents are packages that they can track. When did these get used? And in all these other ways that just wasn't possible with custom intents either. So like, I don't know. I'm not saying they're tracking it. I'm just saying something could securely like use that sort of intelligence over time of like, what is this person doing, and how can we build shortcuts for them, and just then they can take those, look inside, and improve them themselves too, not just rely on our AI overlords to get it all right for us the first time.
Yeah. So Amazon updated their app to support a great number of shortcuts. Is that app intents, or is that something else they're doing with all these options?
That's for sure app intents. And that was a perfect example of, for me, even as the guy who worked at Amazon who built that replied to my Mastodon post and was like, yeah, we love him. And I was like, why? And he said that they were sold on the action button. And if you it's basically, the action is just called open Amazon. And it's the same thing as the other ones. If it has a parameter to open to the different destinations. And so it's just one action, but as an app shortcut, there's 8 different app shortcuts for it automatically. And I just built shortcuts so I could put them in the widget as well. But you basically don't need my shortcuts to run these. You can just ask Amazon, or just ask Siri to open your Amazon orders and it'll do it. But he basically said they were sold on the action button because it put them in that list, and then it was just the main button on the phone could show all the different sections of Amazon and you could open to it, which I thought was the corporation wants this. no real person might ever use it that way. But like, if you're trying to sell that to your boss,
Right. Yeah.
saying here's the way that they can just only use us was like, but that convinced Amazon, like, to me, I was like, I need to pay attention to that. Like, there is a weird motivation with app intents because some people are like, if you take all the functions out of my app and make them available elsewhere, why do they ever use my app? And I had a really interesting, I didn't mention this before, but through doing my app intents consulting, I just did a conference in Spain where I gave a presentation about Apple Intelligence, and essentially all that stuff about building your CRUD intents and stuff is kind of what I pitched them. But somebody at the conference was like, if someone's going to the level of engaging with your app intents, they're a power user already. They're somebody they're investing more in your platform by using these things rather than less. And so I loved hearing that because I've been worried about that and I had never heard that from someone else. And I think it was the same thing of like, these people can make their phone an Amazon phone in some ways. And like, nobody's really going to do that. But in your CEO's eyes, he's like, yeah, that's totally what's going to happen. So that's the fascinating of selling an individual person versus how do I get engineering team at Amazon to implement this. It's like, just sell them on it only being good for you.
Right.
But this was too, I noticed these because I genuinely use them and was like, this is nice because I've been like ordering stuff from Amazon. Like, I'm trying to just spread it out more rather than buying a bunch of things and not using it. And so I just found myself checking the order history constantly. And then I was like seeing these app shortcuts and it just takes me there rather than opening the app and tapping the thing. So it was like cut down half of the interactions with the app just from this.
Totally. Yeah. Do we cover everything that you want to? Any more on app intents or anything else in shortcuts?
I mean, not like I do just think I'm still so excited to see what Apple Intelligence becomes because
it's so early on. Like, imagine 5 years from today. Like, yeah.
And I feel like I see the forest for the trees, or however way that metaphor goes. That it seems like a lot of people in the press are like, I mean, it makes sense. What they've released now can be underwhelming. Like, Image Playgrounds I don't care. Basically, I have no opinion, which is not a good thing.
The emoji stuff, pretty rad. Some of it.
Yeah, I haven't actually tried that. Maybe that's probably why.
It is a lot of fun, I must say.
And the text tools, the writing tools is like, yeah, it's clearly useful when you need it, but it's not like a game changer for everything. Like, I'm not going to write a whole email with it or whatever, but I've definitely used it when I get like, when I'm sending frustrated feedback or something. It's like, write this professionally. And it is like, I can kind of get my emotion out, but then I'm not just dumping on the person. It's like, I actually want to be productive.
It's hilarious to make a very angry message and say, make this happy or whatever. 'Cause I'll read it, and some of them are just so condescending, and like the person would be even angrier if I sent them this version of this.
That's true.
It's kind of funny,
I mean,
some of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where I've just kind of been like, yeah, but what App Intents does is so cool. And I think though, it's like, I can see the reality of like what not everyone's going to do it the way that I want. And that it should be in many ways. I think what's hard is there's some stuff that Apple said that is maybe there's some context that is like unsaid. Even like one thing is opening your app is now common behavior, versus what that really means is for the last 4 years, you're supposed to show when run, not open when run. And now you're supposed to open when run in a very literal way with workflow shortcuts actions. But to a developer watching that session, do they understand that in the way that like I do? in that context. They've never even used shortcuts or an open when run or show when run function versus like basically the reason is previously you were supposed to like be like, hey, let's like do this thing. And it's like, oh yeah, you can add a task and then it doesn't take you out of your context and you can just do this quick thing. The point now is you're supposed to say add a new task and it says, okay, here's the task, shows you in the app that that task was created because Apple Intelligence basically follows you through the system. So you're like, open this, create this, now I'm there doing it. Versus before it was like, I'm in Twitter, but I want to like, or like I'm at work, but I want to tweet something. I can send off a tweet without ever leaving the app. They basically have totally shifted to like, now you should be moving with the person as they do things. But like, is every single app on the App Store going to get that and do it well in iOS 18.4 when this releases? Probably not. And so I think this is the like existential thing of like,
Sure.
what we do want with this isn't really going to be good and until like 19 or even, I mean, there's rumors today of like 19.4 is when features were released or pushed back for. So like, to me, it makes sense that right now they're like pushing Apple Intelligence and they're giving developers some time to do app intents. I think in January, they're going to say, start making them now. This is coming in iOS 18.4. This is when what we pitched as Apple Intelligence is going to be released. And you will be able to use these Siri commands, try to run your app shortcuts in all these intents, and it'll do that semantic matching. It'll have that personal context that's provided from the entities from your app that are securely provided to Siri. But then it's like, they didn't build the action right. And so it kind of doesn't work. Or like they built 3 actions, but they have 15 functions in their app. So you try 3 of them and then and 80% of the other app doesn't work. And so you're going to not ever try again as humans do. And that's going to be hard versus I will totally pitch that if you use one of my clients' apps, it will work and it'll work 100% of the way that it's supposed to and have every bell and whistle in there because I know I'm like, I want you to build the full thing because it's all available. And what's so good compared to before is if you build it, you're not just making a really cool shortcuts experience. You're making this cool Siri Apple Intelligence powered experience. And everyone who uses shortcuts then has all the tools they could ever want. So like, to me, this is like the best of all possible paths for Apple Intelligence and shortcuts because developers have a reason to adopt these APIs and they have a reason to adopt them to the full extent. And you basically they serve their whole community from the very first person who's never even used it all the way to the person who's celebrating it and sharing their unique workflows online.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's super cool. And I think that is sort of the necessary focus beyond they can't just build every action themselves. And so what they instead of just giving us fish, they've taught all the developers to fish some metaphor.
Yeah.
You get it.
Yeah. You fish, instead of DoorDash, you'll learn how to find the fish and cook it and all that.
Hey, the DoorDash better add some good shortcuts. It's all those apps. It really is. Even I was able to meet up with some at that conference, and like they're all interested, and I think they just don't understand it.
What's the company that lets you order from your Reminders grocery list now? Is that DoorDash? I saw that recently. Like one of the delivery services will integrate with Reminders grocery list and like make it easy for you just like hit buy or something.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. See, that's where it is DoorDash. We'll let you import your grocery list from
crazy.
Reminders.
I mean, I wouldn't trust that really, but sure.
But that's totally. They could add actions that's like add to grocery list. Like,
sure, totally.
I met somebody. I don't think it was DoorDash at that conference. And I was like,
DoorDash groceries would be so expensive. Like, it's like a nice to have like meal every once in a while when I want to pay 40% more.
Totally. I mean, yeah. Now
it's like let me make the groceries, which are even more expensive here. Okay.
What it was I met someone at Tinder, and I was like, how would you use shortcuts to swipe right? Like, basically. Oh, man, that's crazy.
Oh, God. You could go down some dark avenues where, you have, it's swiping based on
yeah, I was like,
criteria.
There's some just weirdness that gets along of like automatically block everybody that I don't like or something.
Right, yeah.
I think there's one other thing of just iPad in the world of all of this has been interesting. I think for the like shortcuts power user community, it has been interesting because macOS provided a lot of just like niceties for shortcuts of like, it is just easier for me to organize things there because it's a little bit quicker. I mean, the command line tool was also super powerful, but I think on a high level, app intents is really important for iPad because I do think some of the benefit or just some of the focus and attention on iPad has left a little bit from some of the developer world. But I think basically app intents means like you don't have to pick one by building an intent. It does work across all those platforms. And so I do think it, in the long run, means that we'll get, like Vision OS helps as well, but like we'll get better iPad apps because it is like, well, you might as well make them work everywhere.
Sure. And it seems that it's easier to get app intents on iPad than the Mac, maybe, because I don't know.
It should be pretty similar in the future.
Okay.
The same thing.
Because I think the app ecosystem on the Mac is just so different, right? I know you have the iPhone mirroring, and maybe app intents can actually go through the iPhone to the Mac in some way, but I'm not sure.
Not really that way.
Okay.
But I think just the same thing of like app intents as an API works on Mac versus custom intents wasn't really good. And so just like starting there to invest in this ecosystem that wasn't really worth it isn't versus like if you're going to add Apple Intelligence, now here's the opportunity. I still think it makes the Mac to me a better platform because I can automate on it now with shortcuts. And so I think it really, just even with the iPad, the iPad has never made sense to me without shortcuts or workflow. And that's just my personal thing, but it's like, I could never do all of what I do and be moving in between apps all the time and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's been something that's sort of like missed from that iPad Pro conversation is like, I don't know, I feel self-conscious saying this on this show, I guess a little bit, but like to me, it doesn't make sense to buy a $3,000 iPad if you're not going to automate anything on it. Like if you like sort of, I mean, it's true for me of any computer and I would want to automate anything, but like, I think that has been a thing that is like hard when pro users are so embedded in that community it's like, if you bought this expecting to be able to get all your work done, but you don't automate anything, it is harder than Mac. And I think that just like basis sometimes does get lost in some of these conversations. But I think to flip that in the positive way, we have automation on iPad. So it is awesome. And there is all this stuff that you can do in this whole world that really is, to me, not accessible without automation on iPad is now accessible and becomes this platform that works and adapts to what I want. Like even the other day, I was working on my records and I have an Airtable database for all of them. And I was building my shortcuts on the iPad to interact with it. And I also took the iPad off the keyboard and put it vertically against the wall where I was working on the records and used it as reference. And like, that's just something I couldn't do with the laptop. And I still just love that it is this tool that I can take away from my computer and still do this amazing amount of productivity and automation that is like, I don't want to do that on my phone for sure. And it's just a whole different platform that I just also enjoy using and is more pleasant. But I think sometimes too, it's when I have to go do 5,000 things of data entry, I do go to my Mac for that because it is just a little bit easier. But I prefer the world where I have all of these rather than just one. So that's my iPad pitch.
Yeah. One of the coolest shortcuts on Vision OS things I heard recently was someone I had on on Vision Pros has a shortcut set up when it connects to, his work Wi-Fi. It asks him what mode he wants to be in for work, and it then opens up the various apps associated with that. And I thought that was very cool because, it was just a way where you put in the headset, you're pretty much always instantly connected to the Wi-Fi, and then just ask you, what do you want to do today? And then it'll get the apps that you want, so you don't have to go and, get all those sorted.
That's what I tried to do originally, but I couldn't keep the windows pinned there. And that was
you need basically when you launch this shortcut, you need to look at where the next app is going to open.
Yeah.
It's you very cognitively
totally.
let me look over here, then above me, and you have to know what's coming next, kind of thing, to know which app. Yeah, so it's a bit of a workout.
It's the same thing of shortcuts plus vision plus I don't even know the term for it, placement pinning. That's when suddenly Vision Pro makes sense also to me in this whole other way that right now is just kind of too cumbersome to get to. And so those are other worlds where
sure.
I'm are people in Apple thinking about that? I mean, obviously, but that's the same thing of App Intense is also clearly built for Vision OS. I'm not going to go click all those things. And so you just don't do it versus if you can just say to Siri. I think what's fascinating is that other level of what's a Vision OS widget or control, and that level of just a whole different paradigm shift for shortcuts. Or if I look at my light, a shortcut should pop out behind it, and I should be able to run that. Those things are just so cool, and it's I was definitely at WWDC. I was trying to meet any Apple employees I could be and be you guys doing this? And if not, it's we should
totally. Well, I think that's everything, right? As far as
there's always new developer things. We have this one link of a couple of developers have been covering App Intense, which is super cool. And I like to see there's some new ways to join data. That one story I covered, and then I didn't link to the story, but I really need to because I feel like I owe it to him. Vidit, who makes Lookup, wrote a really good story about just app Intense driven development is odd, and it's a whole coming from the world where we had siloed apps. This is the anti-silo. It's every single part of your app is pulled apart as a Lego almost.
Sure.
And so it's fascinating, and just what it means to develop for this world and design for Apple Intelligence is going to be super interesting to see. And I feel like we should talk about it next time.
Absolutely. And it'll be an interesting thing to see how Apple Intelligence rolls out, and in a year from now, what this all looks like.
Totally.
So where can folks follow you online and read your awesome work? And if you're a developer, learn more about App Intense.
Sure. MatthewCassinelli.com is where everything goes through right now. I've sort of fallen off on the newsletter. I'm struggling to figure out the right mix of things, but I do have a newsletter where I still intend to update it, just maybe less frequently, of just everything that's new in shortcuts. But then I also have a membership program and a consulting. It's all in the menu on my website if you want to check it out. But yeah, I work with developers now and can basically help design any App Intense, Apple shortcuts, or Apple Intelligence app shortcuts experience from top to bottom. I also can build custom shortcuts on top and do my special thing there. So if any iPad Pros apps out there, I know you've got an awesome audience, and so let's totally work together, because I do this because I just want to see it right. It's I know, and I have all this, and I can help you. So why not? It's just kind of made sense over time, and so I've been having a lot of fun doing that with teams.
Very cool. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been great catching up and learning about what's new in Shortcuts.
Yeah, it's always my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, that's my interview with Matthew all about Shortcuts version 8. My thanks to Matthew for his time recording this episode. My thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk with everyone again real soon.